Hello, fourth graders. Welcome to Session 4 of our Social Global Studies Unit 2 on Change Makers. We're going to spend today's session watching another educational video. I'm going to watch one and demonstrate how to take important information away with a question in mind, and then you'll have a second video that's linked into your digital notebook that you'll practice the same strategy with. Inside your paper journal, you will notice a think sheet that looks like this. And it basically has a line at the top where you will write down the question. These questions will be given to us in the video. So you'll see in a moment, we're going to be using Brain Pop. And if you're familiar with the Brain Pop videos, it usually begins with a letter that's written to Tim and Moby that ends in a question and is the reason for them creating the video. We're going to use that as our question. So you're going to watch as I do, write down the question from the Tim and Moby letter at the beginning, but the remainder of the video, we're going to be pulling and pausing, that is, and pulling out some important facts that answer just that question. As we typically watch a educational video or even read an article or a text about an educational era or a historical era, that is, sometimes it's hard to keep that question in mind because we're also learning new facts that may surprise us, shock us, what have you, and then we don't know where to put that fact. We want to almost honor it. We want to document that fact, but if it doesn't directly relate to the question, it feels like we don't have a place to really put that question. With that in mind, there are two categories on this T-chart think sheet. Whatever the answers, whatever notes and details we find while watching the video that answer the question, we're going to place here, just in like phrases, not complete sentences, whatever we find in that video. And we'll pause the video, give ourselves some time to write those phrases and such down. However, there might be some times where to you, you're thinking, oh, that's new information for me. I didn't realize that. Oh, but it doesn't really answer the question, but I still want to document it. That's where this interesting facts side comes in. Similarly, you can pause and jot down those interesting facts that are helping you to better understand the American Revolution time era. So let's get started. So let's take a look at the video and pause when we come across the question that's asked at the beginning of our Brain Pop video.
Well, now you've done it. It says right here, no skipping through town on Sunday whilst eating an ear of corn. These reenactors take their blue laws seriously. Dear Tim and Moby, why did England make 13 American colonies? Wouldn't it have been simpler just to make one big one? From Marlena.
So I'm going to pause right there and use this question and transfer it to our think sheet. Why did England make 13 American colonies? So this will be the question we think about. So when we get to an answer or one of the little minor answers along the way in this video, we'll pause and add it to the left-hand side of this column.
Good question. Maybe England would have done that if they'd thought of it from the beginning. But the 13 colonies weren't set up based on some well-organized master plan. The only real plan England had was to get rich and powerful. But Europe was obsessed with stories about riches in the so-called New World. It started with Christopher Columbus bringing back news of the Americas in 1493. Then the race was on to snatch up all that land. All of Europe's powers wanted in. Spain had a head start, since Columbus was working for them. In the 1500s, they grew fabulously wealthy on gold and other resources from South America. Portugal was close behind, making a fortune growing sugarcane in Brazil. Setting up colonies to get rich was part of a system called mercantilism. Governments tried to accumulate as much wealth as possible through trade. For Spain, that meant importing lots of gold and silver mined in the colonies. For other countries, it meant shipping raw materials from the colonies to the motherland, turning them into finished goods, and then exporting those goods for sale to the colonies and other nations. By the early 1600s, England was ready to get in on all this colonizing action. South and Central America had already been claimed by then. So, King James I fixed his eye on America's east coast. Well, no, people already lived there, and had for thousands of years. The native peoples of North America had their own civilizations and cultures. But that didn't stop England from laying claim to the land. In 1606, the king issued a charter to set up a colony in Virginia.
So if we look at this date, 1606, the king issued a charter to set up a colony in Virginia. It sounds like Virginia was the first place that England started colonizing. So if we were to take that date, we can put it on here that England first colonized Virginia. And this was in 1609. Something else as we were watching this video that was interesting and new information for me was about mercantilism. And this was basically the whole idea behind countries in different locations taking control over other countries, which as we learned, it helps make them money. So another tip I want to give you as you watch these videos and watch with a question in mind is maybe you use different colors, and then after you find a fact, you draw a line under it. That way things stay neat. But right now we're starting to learn that maybe the reason they didn't just make one big colony was because they started small.
It granted a private company the right to settle the land. The company then rented it out to English citizens to go live there. In return for the charter, the colony would send home a portion of its valuable resources, like gold. But as it turned out, there was no gold in Virginia. Lucky for them, the new colony soon hit on another big moneymaker: tobacco. Yeah, King James thought smoking was a nasty habit too. But he didn't seem to mind all the money it made him. In the coming decades, a bunch more charters were issued for new colonies. Southern colonies like Virginia were based around farming.
I think it's good to note that we're starting to see these colonies grouped together. So southern colonies like Virginia were based around farming. And this map a moment ago kind of showed.
They planned southern.
Okay, so right there we can see that the southern colonies are still on the East Coast, but just that little section of the 13 colonies. And it says they were based on farming. So I'm going to jot that down on here, that the southern colonies, it's getting me to wonder, so if we're hearing a lot about Virginia and that's the southern colonies, is there then a northern set of colonies? Let's listen and continue with that thought.
Besides tobacco, they planted rice, indigo, and cotton, cash crops grown for profit. And since they didn't pay the workforce, those profits were huge. The whole system was built on slavery. People from West Africa were kidnapped, sold into slavery, and shipped to the colonies. Their journey to America was one leg in the triangular trade. In the next leg, crops and other raw materials from the colonies were shipped back to England. There, they were manufactured into goods and shipped to Africa to be traded for more slaves. But it wasn't only the southern colonies involved in the slave trade. Colonies to the north began exporting rum to Africa, trading it for enslaved people. They were brought to the Caribbean islands and forced to work on sugar plantations. Then the sugar was sent back to the colonies to be made into more rum.
If I was to pause and think about the facts that I'm learning in the moment right now from this video, it isn't necessarily answering why England made 13 separate colonies. It's more talking about trade and the products that were being raised in the colonies, and then how they had slaves to support that production. So right now, I'm going to keep watching without writing anything down because this isn't answering my question.
Cutting England out of the deal like that was sort of against the rules of mercantilism. But the Crown was making too much money on other colonial businesses to care. The middle colonies sent grain and corn, plus livestock and iron ore.
So wait, now I'm hearing about middle colonies, and that they sent grain, corn, and livestock and iron ore back to England. So So I jotted that down right here. So we had the southern colonies, we just were learning about, they did a lot with farming. The middle colonies, similarly, they farmed grain and corn, but they also had livestock and iron ore that they also sent back to England. So we're getting a feel for why England wanted these different chunks of the land to be in charge of different things.
While New England colonies sent fish, lumber, and whale oil for
Now I'm hearing about a third grouping of the colonies called the New England colonies. So now I'm starting to see how the development of the groupings of the colonies. So these 3 points are really helping to answer this question. Why did England make 13 colonies instead of just 1? This isn't really necessarily why there's 13 colonies, but I am starting to see 3 regions. But I also think they were settled at different times as well. They talked about how Virginia was the first, which I can infer then that the others came after. So as this video concludes, and as your video concludes, what I'd like you to do is to be thinking back about the question at the top and the answers you have on the bottom, or on the left-hand side of this think sheet. So what I'd like you to do is turn to your digital notebook, and you will turn and play the other Brain Pop video, and in your think journal, or not your think journal, sorry, in your paper journal, find this think sheet. Once Tim and Moby play the question, pause the video and write that question at the top. Then go ahead and hit play and toggle back and forth, writing down any details or answers to that question. Off you go.